also the British wanted you on your side. So they would do a lot of things trying to get you, like, if you stay with the crown, we will give you land out in Ohio and so forth. This is a good hunting area. The Indians like this area a lot. Like I was telling you earlier about the religion, it says that religious affiliates, the beliefs of the founders of 55 delegates from 1787 Constitutional Convention. 49 were Protestants, 2 were Roman Catholics, and among the Protestants delegates, the Constitution Convention, 28 were Church of England, which they still were part of Church of England. You can still be part of that. And 8 were Presbyterians, 7 were Congregationalists, 2 were Lutherans, and 2 were Dutch Reform, and 2 were Methodist. So you had a lot of different religions in this country, but that was the reason this country was found. You could practice any religion you want. So you remember that. You'll see that in other times of history. In World War II, you couldn't be a certain religion because you wasn't what the country, the main power was telling you. They wanted to be here in the United States. You can be any religion you want. You can believe in anything you want. Okay, starting in 1765, the members of the American Colony Society rejected the authority of the British Parliament to tax without representation in the government during the following decade. Protests by colonists known as patriots. So New England patriots, England kind of makes all sense. Continued to escalate as the Boston Tea Party in 1773, during which patriot destroyed a consignment of taxed tea from the Parliament controlled and favored by the East India Company. The British responded by imposing punitive laws on the conservative acts in Massachusetts in 1774 until the tea had been paid for. So they punished them. They found out who they were and they punished them until they could pay the taxes what they just ruined of the tea. Following which patriots of other colonies rallied behind the Massachusetts state. In 1774, the patriots set up their own alternative government to better coordinate their resistance of efforts against Great Britain, while other colonists known as loyalists preferred to remain subject to the British crown. So, we still had the ones who wanted to go forward, the ones who were loyal to the crown. Tensions escalated, and the outbreak of fighting between the Patriot militia. Now, militia units you all come from one town. You all came from Germantown. And they called up the militia unit. We need all you to join the infantry or the cavalry. So we would have you sign your paper of your name. You bring your own horse with your own rifle or pistol, and then you would go fight for the freedom of this country. This is an original militia record from here in Germantown. Now this predates this time of war, but it's the same purpose, the same thing. So they would join up. Now you're all militia soldiers. So you're not run by the Congress. You're not run by all of them. You're running by the state or where you're fighting from. The blue uniform that was passed around, that was a Continental. The South Carolinas had a little bit different uniforms. North Carolinas, Pennsylvania, all the different colonists all had, and then they had the national uniform. But if you were a militia, you could wear anything you want. There was no standardized uniform. So you could just wear your regular civilian clothes you wore every day. But this is an original paper from the 1820s of a militia unit, cavalry from this area. And a lot of it was to protect from the Indians that were in this area and so on. First battle you'll hear about is Lexington Concord. In April of 1775, after which the Patriot Suffolk resolved, in fact, to replacing the royal government in Massachusetts, could find the British to control the city of Boston. The conflict then evolved into a global war, during which the Patriots, later the French and Spanish and Dutch allies helped. So everybody always hear about the French helping, but there was actually two other countries that helped somewhat help us start trying to separate ourselves from the English. The French didn't come after a little bit later until they wanted to see if we could actually fight and actually see if we can actually win a battle against the British, because they're a lot bigger force than what we had here with the militia and the regular. The conflict then evolved to a global war, which the Patriots, later with their French and Spanish Dutch allies, fought the British and Loyalists in what became known as the American Revolution. Patriots of each of the 13 colonies formed a provisional Congress that assumed power to the old colonial government and suppressed loyalism, claiming King George III ruled to be tyrannically inferior of the colonists. Right as an Englishman, the Continental Congress declares the colonies free and independent state. So later you'll read, we'll talk about some of the other battles and stuff. So what they're doing right there is, the first battle happened. It didn't turn out too well for the Continentals. They were beaten a lot, but they were still fighting, which eventually they called it Napoleonic War fighting. You're standing shoulder to shoulder. So you're standing shoulder to shoulder with everyone, and you have a smoothbore musket. So now you can go and you have one shot with this, and you got all these lines of coming after you. So now you have to go through the process of firing your musket. With the British, it was 13 steps to load your musket. Now that's them trying to fire the musket while the enemy's firing at you. So I will show you how they would have loaded the musket. 1, gun in front of you. 2, open cartridge box. You would have your round already ready with powder, everything. 3, tear it. 4, pour powder in it. Now you got a lead ball. 5, push the ball down the barrel. 6, take rammer. 7, ram, charge. 8, return rammer. 9, you would have a flash pan. Now you have more powder that you would have to put in your pan here. And when I say flash pan, you got flint. It's going to cause a spark to hit that gunpowder that goes into the rifle to make it fire. So he tears it, he pours it in the pan, he puts the safety down. This is the next step. Then you're given the command to fire. Ready. Aim. Fire. Boom. And you do it all over again. Good soldier was supposed to shoot 3 accurate shots in 1 minute doing that. But you got all these guys lined up doing that. So you'll start seeing in a lot of the battles, especially the Continentals and the militia, thought, we can go head to head against the British. But the British was so perfect doing this. They practiced and trained and trained and trained every single day. You got to remember, these colonists that were fighting, these were farmers, people who worked in making candles, plates, businessmen. These guys were not soldiers. So it took them a while to get to the hang of how to load, fire. They're used to hunting, but they got to get faster process.
So at each step of that loading, reloading, each step of that, they were taking a step too. They were walking at the same time?
No, you would actually have company halt.
Oh, they would
You would stand in the position, and then you would load. Then you can march after you were done loading. Now, you can load on the march. It's a little bit harder. They realize every time they would do that, they would stop, load, fire. You might fire in a place for a while. Then they would tell you to go to port arm or shoulder arms, and then you continued your movement. But you only got one shot. So it took a while. And these are just big lead balls. And when you're fired out, and then when I get into the Civil War part, I'll tell you about smoothbore rifling. But right now, these are all smoothbore. So when it's shot, it's fired, and it is like a knuckleball in baseball. It's floating around. So I might be aiming straight ahead, but it might go to the left or to the right or up high or hit the ground. You never know where it's going to hit. So you'll see a lot of people in the Revolutionary War all the way to the Civil War until they started getting rifled guns with a lot of odd places they were getting hit. Shoulder, leg, things like that.
So, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
So that bore on that, so that bullet is not turning as it comes out of that?
No, it's just a lead ball.
Straight.
Yeah, it's just a
That's
round
why it
lead
floats
ball.
all over the place.
So when it's fired, it's bouncing in there.
Yeah, I see.
And when it comes out, it's just like a knuckleball. So when you throw it, it's
Yeah, I see.
that's why everybody was standing shoulder to shoulder. Because if you put enough lead downfield, you're going to hit somebody. And that's what they're doing at you. Pistols were the same way. Now, the militia soldiers, which were from Virginia, the Carolinas, things like that, they started using the long rifles that were octagon barrels. Well, now those were really kind of your first rifles. Any of you seen the movie The Patriot? Okay. That's one that, if you get a chance, watch that. It's not the most accurate movie, but it gives you a little bit of history. Notice the octagon barrel, and a lot of those were by farmers, or these were good soldiers that learned how to do this. So when they fired, these were except going like this when it came out. Actually, it was coming right at what he was pointing at. So it started getting better. So all the guns that were being used by the colonists and the militia units were smoothbore, but the ones that were made by gunsmiths, the octagon barrel ones, they started getting better. They were starting to come more of the rifling, and eventually they figured if we put rifling in the sleeve of the barrel, now it's going to start rotating and going farther like you're throwing a football. Does anybody have a question? Any more questions right now? I don't mind. I just wanted, if anybody has a question, what I'm talking about. Okay. The Patriot leadership progressed the political of liberalism and republicanism to reject the monarch and aristocracy, and proclaimed that all men were created equal. Congress rejected British proposal requiring alliance to monarch and abandon of the independent. So they told them, no, you're not going to get what you want. You're staying loyal to us. Did African American soldiers or African Americans get to fight in the American Revolution?
Me? Yes.
Yes? Okay. Now, what was the deal if they signed up with the Continental Army to fight, or with the militia? What was the deal if they would fight for their independence? Just guess. They're slaves. You. Their freedom. Okay, that's one thing. What would be the next thing they would give them? And they're giving this not just to the African American soldiers, but to other people fighting for their independence now. What else? Land. Okay. So those are two things that they were going to fight for. And if you fought for them, they were going to give you land and your freedom, which that did happen a lot. The British were forced out of Boston in 1776, and then captured and held in New York City for the duration of the war, nearly capturing General Washington and his army. The British blockaded the ports and captured other cities in brief periods, but failure to defeat the Washington force. In early 1778, following the failed Patriot invasion of Canada, a British army was captured by a Patriot army in the Battle of Saratoga, following which the French openly entered the war as the allies of the United States. The war later turned the American South. The British captured the army of the South Carolina. So really you'll see most of the fighting was, you think of, up on the East Coast, but there was fighting in the South. And those were really some of that crucial fell. Then we started getting into, they started winning these small battles, and then they couldn't resupply because, like I said, they were coming out of Canada. So how could you get from Canada down south? You had to put them on a boat, take them all the way up St. Lawrence River, down the coast. But on the coast, there's forts run by the colonists. So they're bombarding the British boats. But if they were sending soldiers from England over, it was taking longer. So they were having a hard time getting enough men down south. Plus, they didn't realize down south there's swamps, and a lot of guys were getting yellow fever and a lot of health problems down there. So they started losing more men because the people in the South, we've lived here. Any of you was born and raised in the South until you came up here? Okay, has anybody been in the South? Okay, you know how hot it could be and things like that. But you get used to it after a while, right? Well, that's what these guys did. The British people, the loyalists, or from the crown, when they were coming, they might have been from a different country. They'd never ever seen anything like that. And through history and through major conflicts of World War I, World War II, Civil War, you'll start hearing about guys had to adjust to their atmosphere where they were at in different parts of the country. Even now, when a soldier goes over to the Middle East, it's over 126 degrees. But then you had guys who were in Korea that dropped down in the negative degrees in Korea. So the revolution was also played when the soldiers were fighting, played a major conflict of the weather in different areas. So just think about that when we go through the other times of history. But failed to enlist enough volunteers and loyalist civilians to take effect control, combined the American and French forces to capture the Second British Army at Yorktown in 1781. Effectively ending the war in the United States, a peace treaty in 1783 confirmed the new nation's complete separation of the British Empire. The United States took position as nearly all the territory east of the Mississippi River and south of the Great Lakes, which the British retaining control, and Canada and Spain taking Florida. In the period after the peace treaty in 1783, the Loyalists was subjected to extreme suppression and acts of violence, including murder, of lynching. So what they're saying here is there were still loyalists to the crown that was here, and they were still for King George. Well, now they started causing a lot of problems. Well, we got our independence. We don't have to listen to you. And they started actually grabbing them, hanging them from trees. Well, that's kind of like what King George just did when they wanted their independence. The Loyalists wanted their independence. So they're going to have to come up with a better idea how to handle this. A lot of them, if you look in history, a lot of them who were still loyalists to the king, which he was still the king, ruling in Canada, a lot of them left what became the United States and went to Canada. So, that being treated awful here, brought up on, there was times where people were brought up on charges for stealing things. But because they knew they were loyalists, they can get away with it, so they would try them fast, quickly, hang them, put them in prison, do something like that, get rid of them. So a lot of families wind up, after the revolution, wind up going to Canada and getting away from it. Or the British and the Americans came to a conclusion that said, we will take some of the loyalists to the crown, and we will take them back to England or one of our other colonies, in like Jamaica and some of the other areas the English Empire ruled.